Marks, and I'm a trustee with the Bellevue Schools Foundation. I want to welcome you to the third in our series of Education Connections. These are sponsored by the Bellevue Schools Foundation, and they are programs intended to deepen public understanding of the work being done in the Bellevue School District with the support of the foundation. Tonight, we're going to hear about culturally responsive literacy. This is work developed and delivered by Amber Anderson and her colleagues and supported through a partnership grant with the foundation. Amber Anderson is an elementary curriculum developer in the Bellevue School District and has taught and coached in Title I and LAP schools for more than 20 years. She's passionate about ensuring relevant and rigorous literacy and social studies instruction for our youngest learners, and is currently serving in her second year on the board of the Washington State Council for Social Studies. Amber's original intentions for this grant were nearly met in the Title I and LAP elementary classrooms pre-COVID. But once COVID hit and created chaos in our school systems, Amber and her team's work expanded to meet the unique needs created by remote learning. Her partnerships with the King County Library System allowed her to expand this work of broadening availability of rigorous and relevant literacy throughout the entire Bellevue School District K-12 system. The Bellevue Schools Foundation is proud to be a partner to this extremely valuable work, which has benefited students across the district in all buildings and at all grade levels. I'm sure you're going to enjoy hearing from Amber. I have heard her give this explanation, this presentation, and it is marvelous. If you have questions as she does this, please put them in the Q&A box, which is functioning, and then we will gather those questions and we'll ask Amber to address them when she's finished. Thank you very much, and thank you, Amber, for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me here. I cannot express the gratitude that I have for having this partnership and this availability. It has really launched a practice of being much more critical examiners of what we present to our students and really making sure we elevate the choices that our students have for their reading, for their joy, and for seeing themselves in academic life. So I'm really excited to be here tonight and eager to share with you what this means for our classrooms. So when we talk about the why, when we talk about the mission of what we do, as you know, the BSD mission is to serve each and every student academically, socially, and emotionally through a rigorous and relevant education that is innovative and individualized. And really very important to this is a learning community that values one another's humanity and provides courageous support for equitable education for all students. And a large part of that is to be able to affirm and inspire each and every student. And what that really means when it comes down to thinking about what text students have accessible to them, or what stories, what narratives, what nonfiction pieces are students seeing in the classroom, whether it's through a teacher read aloud, whether it's through paired reading, whether it's through independent reading, that they're seeing that's affirming their identity, their place, their lived experiences, that says you belong here, you are an academic, you are part of this space, and you are equally valued. And that is the work that we are doing with the Culturally Responsive Library. I give you this little picture right here to think about who are our students. So when we talk about serving and affirming our students, we're talking about a whole bunch of different students who have different lives and different intersectionalities, and beyond various different maybe ethnicities or racial identities, our students have academic identities, they have gender identities, they have lived experiences, and all of these things are an intersectionality of who they are. And that's why we need to have books and pieces that represent who they are now and who they want to see themselves become. So I want to talk a little bit about what does it mean to have culturally responsive text and the importance of that. We're going to talk about how this is connected to the learning that educators have been doing for the last couple of years and will be doing for the next couple of years, focused on that. And then what does this mean and what does this look like for our classrooms? So one key thing to keep in mind is that what this means to both to validate and affirm empower, build, and bridge. So this idea that when we provide culturally responsive text, there are times in which it is affirming students in the classroom. It's allowing students to see themselves who may not have typically seen themselves in text. It's to elevate identities and empower, to provide these cultural contexts to says to students, you belong in this classroom, you belong in this academic space, and we recognize your culture, your family, your lived experiences, the way you self-identify, things that allow a student to say, I really belong here. Beyond affirming a student whose experiences are present in the text, is we are affirming for the students who are peers to this student, who might not have those lived experiences, who might not have those racial identities or racial backgrounds, might not have that intersectionality of a gender and a particular race, to build understanding and connection for others. So I have this ability. There's a researcher I'm going to talk about a little bit who explains this in a metaphor called the windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. So this concept that we're helping students learn about the lives and people, culture, and history that might not be their own lived experience. And when we start to move into the bridge space, which is sort of like the ultimate achievement, is we're helping students to develop those positive identities and work to actively dismantle stereotypes that they see in their community and help build a space for people to be individuals and not looped into a stereotype. The work that we're talking about and the work that we've been doing stems from a book called Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. And Zaretta Hammond has a quote that really very sort of encapsulates this work that we've been doing, which is, becoming culturally responsive starts with showing genuine care that recognizes the unique gifts and talents of every child, particularly when that child doesn't look like you. As you know, currently in education and even in our Bellevue school system, we have a teaching force that is predominantly white. But when you think about who our students are, when you go back and you take a look at who our students are, the intersectionality of that, our students are far from being homogeneously white. And while we have made changes and our staff is definitely evolving in their complexity of their identities and who they are, we definitely don't mirror yet the complete picture of our Black, Indigenous, and people of color students. So those students who identify as BIPOC students, we don't exactly mirror that in our teaching staff. So this becomes even more important that when we think about our students and we think about who they are and how we are supporting them, we're thinking about this very particular part here, when the student doesn't look like you. And how we affirm that is we are bringing in those texts and those experiences that help to say to students, this person who is your friend is a valuable member of our community and has equal space and place in this, just as you do, just as the person to your right, the person to your left, right? And really making sure that everyone feels as though they are part of the community. If you want to learn more about Zaretta Hammond's work, you can check out readyforrigor.com. This is a concept that really has evolved from something, from work that actually is from a long time ago by Rudy Sims Bishop. She's a professor emerita at Ohio State University. She developed this concept of mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. Simply stated, a mirror is when you see a text and you say, that text reflects who I am. I can connect with that person, that biography, that experience because I see myself in that story. This can work easily for someone who says, like a student who's growing up and says, wow, that is just like me. I have a grandma who lives with me. This story connects with me. This could be a student who says, I too have families that live in two different households, and that reflects who I am. Or this student has recently immigrated here, and that reflects who I am, right? So these lived experiences that mirror our experiences and allow us to feel this deep connection with something greater than ourselves, and that being literature. The next piece to that is a window. So a window is this opportunity when I see somebody else and I say, I actually don't really connect with that. However, I now see it. Like I can see through it. I can understand it. I might have some greater empathy. I might be developing some connections. And while I personally don't connect with the character or the lived experience, I can now empathize. I can now understand. I can take the perspective of another. Right? And later in her work, she said, you know, what we really need to add to this is a sliding glass door. So a sliding glass door is this space where you're going to now move through it. So unlike a window, which yes, can be opened, just like a sliding glass door, we don't typically enter a space or exit a space through a window. We do it through a door. So it's this idea that I can see this in a sliding glass door. I can see you, I can connect with you, I can understand you. And now I'm going to move to that space of being able to empathize and develop a relationship with you. Right? So these sliding glass doors helps us to make those bridges and those connections for students. This is explained by an author named Matt De La Pena, who's written many young adult novels that our students love. And this is, he explains what it was like for him growing up and what it was like for him to finally find a piece of text that inspired him. And he has a kind of a unique connection. So we're going to watch just a quick 2-minute video on this.
Hi, Curly. I'm Charlotte Spencer. I'm Abby. Sam. Savannah. I want to be a graphic designer and a children's physician. I want to be a ballerina, fashion designer, an artist. Happy.
Hi, I'm Matt De La Pena, and we need diverse books. I feel like I'm a living embodiment of why we need diverse books. Growing up, I wasn't a great student. I was what people call a reluctant reader. I felt like literature was a club that I didn't belong to. Like anybody else who isn't good at one thing, I found other things to get involved with. For me, it was sports. I was pretty good at basketball in particular. And because of basketball, I became the first De La Pena to go to college. Once I was at my university, I was introduced to one specific book that changed everything for me. It's called The Color Purple. And it was the first time I had ever had an emotional reaction to a book. It almost moved me to tears. And from that point on, I went in search of that feeling elsewhere. And I realized that books became my secret place to feel. From African-American female authors, I found Hispanic authors. And from that point on, I felt like all I wanted to do was be a part of the world of literature. It doesn't matter if you're African-American, Asian, disabled, part of the LGBTQ community. We all need to see ourselves in books. Because if we don't see ourselves in books, we may not feel as connected to the human experience, the story of all of us. At the same time, books are more than mirrors. They're also windows. I've always believed that reading is the ultimate form of empathy. Yes, we'd love to find ourselves in books and read about ourselves and our own experiences. But it's also important to read about people who aren't like us. It's only then that we'll have a full understanding of the world around us.
So he really puts it perfectly when he says that we have this opportunity to connect with literature because it's part of the human experience. Literature is one of those ways in which we start to not only understand our place in the world, our place in how we see our connection to the greater human kind, but we start to understand how it is that we can be connected to others, and we don't have to be just like them to be connected to them. And this is part of that developmental trajectory of seeing something besides your own self and starting to see others around you in communities and spaces. So one of the key pieces to this is when we start thinking about, and some people may be saying, you know, this is great. I'm so glad that we're having lots of different books in classrooms, but I've been in classrooms. Classrooms have lots of books. We have school libraries, we have classroom libraries. My student brings home books all the time. Like, I don't understand why this would be, you know, so significant. Well, I want to share with you a little bit about the publication rates and why this is important. Okay? So to really understand the impact of this work, we have to roll back actually a couple of years. So when we first went into our classroom, so this was like starting in about 2016, we started walking into classrooms and looking at what was available in those classrooms. And what you saw is some classrooms that where you have a veteran teacher who's been teaching for a really long time. And so they have a collection of books that they've collected, whether it's because their children have aged up and they brought their own personal books, they've bought books, they've paid for books through grants, PTSAs have supported them, families have donated to the classroom library, but over time they have a wide collection. Okay, you've got that sort of like situation A. Situation B is a brand new teacher who doesn't have all of that experience in that place, and they walk in and the classroom library is bare. Part C to this is even if classroom A has all of these books, oftentimes the books reflect what you see in this chart. So this is a group out of Canada who tracks, it's called the Cooperative Children's Book Center for the School of Education. They track all of the books that are published in both Canada and the US, and then they break these out by US. So this is US only publications, which is largely what you'll see in our schools. And it shows you how many of those books are by Black, Indigenous, or people of color that were published by year. So since 2018, so you'll see 2018, 2019, 2020, because 21 will come out probably like this fall in October. And what you notice is what a lot of our BIPOC authors, illustrators, and educators have been saying for a really long time is that we really need to be thinking about why we don't have the representation of the books for our children and our students. And it being part of a larger discussion about both racism, culture, gender, identity in our country. So go to situation A, like I said, about a veteran teacher who might have tons of books in their classroom. What they're probably not going to be is they're probably not going to be books that represent who our students are today. So in 2019, 71% of the children's books that were published in the US were either about white children, talking animals, bears, talking things like cars or trucks, inanimate objects that become characters, but they definitely didn't reflect the lived experiences of who you see as our Bellevue students today. They didn't reflect the students who are bilingual or trilingual. They didn't reflect our students who recently had immigrated to the United States. They didn't reflect the lived experiences of our families that are living in multiple households or have multiple generations, right? They didn't have the experiences that say these are students and the students have a very valid and lived experience. So it is really important that we think about how we do this, because it's not just the numbers that matter, although the numbers are in this chart, but also the content matters. What is inside a book and what it means to affirm or defy or other the children that take place in our country, in our context all the time, when we have uplifted narratives that exclude their experiences from the everyday experience, also only reinforces stereotypes that we are trying to break. And as all of you know, our Bellevue School District is very committed to its equity policy and practice, and really trying to make sure that we are working really hard to break those stereotypes and say to students that this is a real, that your experience is valuable, it's valid, and it is part of our community. One thing that's been outstanding, although there's an asterisk and it does say due to the pandemic, some publishers didn't send review copies, and that there were some limited publications this last year. You'll see there's about 600 fewer books this last year. However, one of the things that the library group who does review this said that was really amazing in their sort of narrative review is that what we're starting to see, while there aren't a tremendous many more, there are only about 29% that are published by authors of color. So there's a difference between publishing a by and about. So by is going to be an author with those lived experiences, where about would be an author who doesn't have those lived experiences, writing about someone who is, for example, Black or Indigenous or Asian or Latinx. So while we only have about 29% of those books who are written by authors of color, what we are starting to see is that they're starting to talk about the many facets of the lives and the sort of intersectionality. So we're starting to see books that are really starting to think about not just the racial experience of a student, but the racial and the gender experience, the lived experience of someone who is both Hispanic and Muslim, a lived experience of someone who is biracial or is adopted into a family that has maybe more than one race, right? Like, so we're starting to see this intersectionality come through and be really positive and super affirming for our students, because our students don't fit into one box. They have many different lived experiences. What also is really noteworthy, and I think this is super fun, is that what the librarian said is that in their review, is that what you're also starting to see is more and more books crossing over into different genres. And it's sort of like a hallmark that culturally responsive texts are sort of taking on their own lives and they're being more popular. So basically what that's saying is culturally responsive text, once you reach the sort of fantasy sci-fi world, you've hit the positive mark. So if you reached into the Harry Potter world or the adventure stories, this means that you're really starting to take a foothold. So the librarians are really excited about the possible trajectory of the idea of getting more and more books by authors of color available for students. Okay. So why is that important? Well, the reason why that is important is when you go back to classroom A, while they may have all of these books, a huge collection of books, the chances of them being even 29% by authors of color is very low. And that's what we want to make sure that we're doing, is that we are starting to represent the authors with their true lived experiences, and that those lived experiences represent our students here that you see on the screen. Okay. So let's talk about what this looks like in our classrooms. So last year we were very excited that in 2021, the collective impact of this grant was that 157 physical classroom sets for 10 elementary schools in the following grades were purchased and provided to classrooms. So even during the pandemic and during the height of the pandemic, we were able to provide 110 to 120 books per classroom that arrived in the spring. So that was in the spring of 21. We made sure those got in the classrooms, teachers had access to the PD, and they were in the hands of kids. So that's a huge lift when you really think about the number of books that is and what that did for our community and our students. In addition to which, we built something called the digital library, which I'm going to talk a little bit about here towards the end. This was a really powerful experience, and we really focused on our Title I and our LAP schools. So our Title I schools include Ardmore, Lake Hills, Sherwood, and Stevenson. And our LAP services or Learning Assistance Program schools are Eastgate, Enatine, Phantom Lake, Newport Heights, Wilburton, and Woodridge. The reason why kindergarten and first grade are not included in these is they were in prior years. So they were in 1819 was kindergarten at title schools, and in 1920 was kindergarten and first grade at those schools. So they had already received those texts. Okay, so this was the collective impact of 2021. This year, we're really thrilled. So the collective impact of 21-22 is 155 more physical classroom sets for 8 of our elementary schools. So those will include Bennett, Cherry Crest, Clyde Hill, Jingmei, Medina, Puesta del Sol, Somerset, and Spirit Ridge. So those will all be arriving. They are scheduled to arrive in February in our classrooms. So we're really hoping that we get through this snow crazy and that we can get passes open and we can get our books here, because there are so many. They come in so many boxes. They come in pallets and they're delivered by a big semi truck. So it's really an exciting sort of unveiling, and we're really excited about what that's going to look like for this coming year for these classrooms. We are continuing to provide PD for teachers, but here's the best part about this. When we provided these books, not only are people very excited, students are excited, teachers are excited, it is shifting practice. So our educators are now looking at their classroom libraries and really saying, where do I need to expand our library to represent who is in my classroom? So each of our schools has a different makeup of student body, right? And I would say even within our own classrooms, that could be different, right? And a classroom next door might need a different example for who to be the mirror, the window, or the sliding glass door, right? And one classroom might need this book, or another classroom might need, it might be a mirror in one classroom and it might be a window in another classroom, right? And so what we're starting to see is educators who are looking at their existing library, they're looking at this library they just received from Bellevue Schools Foundation, and they're saying, you know, really what I need to do is I need to take these other ones out that I had previously, highlight and showcase these books because they more represent the students who are in my classroom, or they're the pictures and the narratives that they need to be seen. And we're starting to see this shift in practice, because it used to be this practice of, well, we just keep all the books in the classroom library because that's what we have, right? And there's this greater intentionality behind it. In addition to which, we're trying to teach students how to look at a book, read a book, and think about it. We talk about it in elementary as reading a book from the heart, the head, or the mind. And so we think about like how when we read a book from the heart, how we connect with it, how it makes us feel. When we read it from the head, we're thinking about connections we're making, right? And when we're thinking about the mind, we're thinking about how's this shaping who we are. And so we practice that with our students, even our youngest students, our kindergartners. And we say to them, so is this book a mirror? Is this a window? Is this a sliding glass door? Why do you know that? How do you know this? Would you recommend this book to someone? And what's really great is there's one school that's gone even further with that. They have the kids write a little review on a piece of paper, and they stick it in the book like it's a bookmark. So then the next person who opens it up gets to see the reflection. So if I were to read the book, I write my little review, I stick it in the book, and then the next person who checks that book out from the class library gets to write one too, and they get to see mine, right? And they almost treat them like trading cards and trade them back and forth. So it's a great way to interact with the books, but also to start making those greater connections, like the author said, about seeing our place in humanity, right? And making that greater connection. Our digital library. So we started off with about 150 titles. We're now up to 363 titles of digital books. And this is a combination of print digital as well as audio digital books. So 15 over the last year. So I went back and I said, go back 1 year since January. So since January of last year, we've had over 15,000 checkouts of these 363 titles. Most of the titles in the collection called Affirming Who We Are, which is the set that's supported by Bellevue Schools Foundation, have been in the top 50 that are continuously checked out. We have 3,000 unique users. That means 3,000 individual people who have checked this out. So 3,000 individual students and or staff who have checked out digital books from this collection. Over 2,000, so 2,200 plus titles have holds on them. So there's some titles that have like 40 holds on them, right? And many of the titles from the grant are in the top 10 checked out books of all BSD digital books. So these are very popular books. They are books that the kids are loving being able to have access to, both audiobooks and print books. And here are 5 titles that are some of the most popular. There's a book called Front Desk, which is just immensely popular for our students. We have over 400 checkouts of that title alone. And the next steps is teaching and learning. BSD will be purchasing about 100 more titles this spring that are going to be released in February to add to this collection. So we're going to see this collection grow. We're really excited about the possibilities of this, because as our students sort of navigate this new digital life that they have this access to a text because they can now enlarge it. They can use the audio. They can use color masking for our students who need that visual support. So there are a lot of advantages to this sort of new digital life and looking at our library in this way. We also have some information that we wouldn't otherwise have had. So in the classroom library, when students borrow books, you don't have this like clear data about what is most popular. And that's the nice thing about having this sort of digital space, is we get to see the sort of digital classroom, what's checked out the most, what are kids loving, What are they craving more of? And that more of is like, which books have the most number of holds, right? Which ones do we need to buy more copies of, right? And so that's a really exciting thing to be able to see that real data evolving, because it's our students' feedback. So the last thing I want to share with you today before we start taking any questions is I want to share a little thank you video that Wilburton made to share what it was like to receive these books. They have a great experience where you'll see students in the classroom sharing what it was like to unveil these.
One, two, three. So friends, these are books as a gift from Bellevue Schools Foundation. These are books for our classroom that we can read anytime. Aw, thank you, Bellevue Schools Foundation. What a wonderful gift. Thank you. I'm keeping this. I like the foundation. I'm keeping this.
So I would love to answer any questions that are coming up. I see there are some in the Q&A.
Can you see those, Amber? You want to take them? There's only a few. The question about getting a copy of the chart with the demographics of the school district, we can take care of that separately.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's something you can get from I think we published that on the Bellevue Schools website.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we do. And so that can be there, or we can send that to anybody if they need that. That's not a problem. And then I see questions about books written by men for a boy's perspective. Absolutely, there definitely are. I think one of the things that we really think about is what are the books that are necessary in order to provide a more holistic picture for our students. So our emphasis is more this kind of being thoughtful about who are our students and who is not already represented in our classroom. So when you look at what perspectives are typically in books for children that have been published largely over the last sort of like 3 decades, which is what you would see in a classroom, it's usually when it has been a character, frequently it is a white male character. That's some of the most, like if you look at who are the Newbery Honors, who are the award winner books. Before this work, to really think about the intentionality about the what we're bringing into our classrooms because of what's available publicized wise. There have been a lot of books that have been in our classroom. So when we did this exercise with teachers and we said, write down before they came to the PD, and we said, write down a book you recently read in class, like a read aloud. And they wrote down these books. Over 9 out of 10 of the books were books that had a white male character, was the read aloud that week. And that's not horrible in and of itself, but if that's the only picture we're presenting to our students, then that's an incomplete picture. So we want to make sure that we are representing what it is like to be boys. And I'm really passionate about making sure that the boys' perspective we're presenting are not just perspectives of students who are sort of like the wiggly student who can't hold still and can't learn, right? Oftentimes, you know, the series called No David, a lot of kids enjoy it. It's funny, yes, but David's always getting in trouble, right? We want to tell our boys, you are wonderful, compassionate, awesome leaders who change the world, who think of others, who are academics, who are smart, who are funny, who are kind. We want to be telling stories that really reinforce these sort of identities we want to be seen in our classrooms. So again, it's not that having a perspective about a boy or a book is necessarily negative, but it is more that we want to make sure that we are presenting more than just that. Okay. Let's see. I see another one. Sorry, we only had like 4 questions, and then there were more. Okay. Can you talk more about reading from the heart, the head, and the mind? Yes. So we really want to help our students start to see books as a space in which they connect. So they connect with others, they connect with literature. And really, when we talk about understanding a book from the heart, the head, and the mind, we're getting them to start thinking about the book from multiple perspectives. This is important, sort of like ground setting work as they move towards doing more sort of literature analysis, perspective analysis of historical events as they get older as students, right? So when we start asking them to take, well, what does it mean to be the perspective of this person in this conflict? Or what does it mean to take the perspective of another person when you might not agree with them, right? We're helping them to build sort of that compassion, that understanding, that equity of understanding that I might disagree with you, but I can understand you have another perspective. So we're trying to get that built in the capacity of our students, right? Let's see. Another one is, my question is a comment to say that this is the most, oh, thank you. That's fabulous. That this is the most hopeful thing that I listened to in a while. Thank you so much for all your work. I really, really love this work. I love what it's doing for students. I love the fact that we're thinking about teaching differently. I mean, providing another resource is great. Don't get me wrong. It's amazing. It's changing. It makes the change in pedagogy, the change in teaching possible, no doubt. And it's fun to read a great new book. But I think the power is in how we're using them. So our students are reading them, our teachers are reading the books, right? They pretty much don't ever spend any time on the shelf, which is what we want. We want them in the hands of teachers and kids.
Actually, Amber, would you expound on that just a little bit? I've heard you talk about the professional development and what this means to teachers who are being guided and helped to bring this literature into the classroom, and what it does for them too, professionally and personally.
Yeah, so we started off with sort of a 101 a couple of years ago, and we started saying, okay, so let's take a look at who's in our classroom. Let's take a look at your books. Let's take a look at the, sort of like what we call like a classroom library audit, right? Take a look at what you have. Take a look at people were like, yeah, I mean, a lot of my books are dated, or I have like half of a novel, right? Like it's been ripped in half, and I thought, like, why are we keeping a half a book on the shelf? Who's going to read a half a book, right? And so kind of like being more legitly like thoughtful about what's in our perspective. And then they would started doing things like we said, okay, so let's not have the teacher label the classroom library. Let's have the students label the classroom library. How would you organize the books? Do you want to organize it by books about friendship? Do you want to organize it by, like topics like friendship, challenges we face, choices we have to make, right? Do you want to label it based on like what it's like to make new friends, or move, or right? So like the kids started developing sort of like the buckets and the themes, right? And then they started, and we said, what is the power in having the students say, like, this is our library, we have ownership in this, we kind of like control what stories come into this space, right? And what we want to have. And it was amazing because you start to see this evolution of the students caring not only more for the books, but really caring more about what they're talking about with the books. So not just, oh yeah, I like to read that book, it was fun, but it was like, that book really meant a lot to me. I really thought about that book. In fact, I came back and I read it a second time, right? I mean, when we have a lot of books to choose from and you want to go back and you want to read something a second or a third time, that says something. There's something about that book that's speaking to you, right? So that was kind of like PD 101. PD 102 was, how do we start teaching our kids to be more cognizant of what they read? Right? How do we teach our students to read from the heart, the mind, right? How do we teach them how to read and look at something as a window or a mirror? How do they start writing a review so that other people can say, yeah, I see why that's a window for you, or I see why that's a mirror for you, right? This is what it is for me. And then how do we say, how do you see this in your world? How do you see this thing you just read about? How do you see this dynamic play out? Whether it's on the playground, in your community, in the broader world, right? Because our students are talking about the world, even in second grade, very, very readily, right? They're talking about the global world. So for them to be able to start seeing what it's like and hearing what it's like both in the US, abroad, right? Hearing what it's like to move here, hearing what it's like to move maybe from even another part of the United States to the Pacific Northwest, right? Like all of those types of experiences help our students become more cognizant and better academics and definitely empathetic people, right? Let's see, that's kind of where we are with the PD. Let's see, what's the next question? Oh, great. Is there any way for parents and community members to be able to see the titles? I'd love to read some and buy some for gifts. Well, that is a awesome request. I have given this PowerPoint to Alice. So Alice, I don't know what method we have to share it, but a lot of the titles, like all of the titles that I clipped and put in here as little pictures, you're welcome to. I can always send you a sample list too of something that, like, here's one set that we bought for third grade. Here's one set we bought for fifth, right? When we bought these sets, it was a collection of BSD librarians, myself, some educators, a director. We all looked at various titles. We looked at reviews of titles. So there's all of these different library networks, whether it's the one that I referred to about the publication rate, the Cooperative Children's Book Center. There's the Library Association for Indigenous communities, right? There's all these different library associations. We read reviews of the books, and we talked about, because there were some books where some groups said, oh, this is a fabulous book, you should have it as part of your library, and another group said this is problematic because blah, 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 blah. So we debated about the intentionality about buying these books. All of them were chosen with great intentionality to bring into our classroom spaces and really highlight and bring people forward. So we're happy to share those lists with anybody. So Alice, I can also send you a sample list if that would be great for each grade level. And
yes, that'd be awesome, and we can update it on our website.
That'd be great. And then one thing we also did was for our communities that have target languages in addition to English. So like Jingmei, Puesta del Sol, Lake Hills, Sherwood, and Stevenson, all that have dual. We have purchased some titles that are in English and some titles that are in Spanish or Chinese, for example, for Jingmei. So they're getting a mixture in their classroom so that they have both languages present in their culturally responsive classroom library sets.
Amber, there's a question that's come up twice. A question about do we have the intention of removing old and outdated or hurtful books? This particular example is about a book that talked about, whites and blacks and whites not wanting blacks in the school. What do you have a response to that? Our system?
Yes, actually, this is a really super valid question, and so glad this one was asked. So I have a personal experience where I just was writing about today. So we are working to do that for sure, absolutely. So one that was just brought to us recently was the book called A Cricket in Times Square. It's not a book that I had read, but I know that it is a book that's common. It's popular among libraries and popular in space. A parent submitted a request via Let's Talk, right, on the BSD website, and said, I'm very concerned about this book. These are the ones that I am, this is the reason why I'm concerned about it. And she identified several racial stereotypes of Chinese Americans that were listed in that book and how hurtful they were. And so she's just submitted this last week. We started talking about it. We immediately talked about it. We looked at how many copies do we have? Which schools are they in? We talked to each of those librarians. We shared what the parent had said. And they said, yeah, we definitely can't have this in our space and in our place. And we're working to remove all of those copies now. So anything that is that, oftentimes, what we need is we need someone to bring it to our attention. We don't just remove anything like, for example, I know everyone's heard of this whole concept of just like banning all these books that like somebody just doesn't like a series of, or, you know, whatever. But this parent was able to identify and said, these are the places, like here's where it is in the text. This is inappropriate. We shouldn't be, you know, having this perpetuated in our schools and in our classrooms. And so we were able to easily, quickly go and look and see why this book was of concern. Right. And we then proceeded with our way of doing this, which we talk with the librarians, we bring up the text, we discuss why this is something we are not going to keep. Right. And so now we are working on finding, you know, it's a little bit harder in a classroom library because there's no digital tracking of those titles. So it is something that now we're going to be working with our teachers to remove if they happen to have it in their classroom libraries. So yes, we definitely want to know. So if you find something that is, please tell us.
Good answer. You know, I think there's I can imagine that you've been asked many times, what is your sense, or what's the sense of your teachers in a classroom where with white children who would have maybe had experience forever of only seeing themselves in books, all stories told through white characters and white people, and then seeing a different kind of book and that tells the same story but has different characters, different racial characters in it. And do you have any way of measuring, any sense of what that difference, how that difference is reflected in the white students' reaction to stories or engagement with literature?
So I think the key to all of this is about how it helps us to feel connected to each other. Because really, when you think about what's the whole purpose of stories, right? So before print, when we did all stories by oral, right? Like when people weren't reading, people weren't writing, right? When you really think about it, as a species, we've really only been reading as a mass populace for about 100 years, in all honesty. Prior to that, it would have been selected populations that had access to being able to read, right? At least at a level that we expect now, right? Like, so when we talk about being able to read text, right? It used to be something only elite people got to really do until the most recent 100 years. When you go back, this is not a skill we've been doing for a while. So all stories used to be oral, right? And what was the purpose of oral stories? Largely, it was to get you to do the things you needed to do to survive. So when you think about like fairy tales, folklore, doesn't matter, from any culture, all of the time they were about like, do this or something bad will fall upon you, right? Like that was a large portion of it. It was like teaching this morality. And stories then started to evolve about what's your position and what's your place, right? How are you connected to others? So if I do this thing and it affects my community, that's not going to be good, right? Oh, and then if I do this thing, but I do well, look at the joy it could bring to my community. So then stories start to evolve over time to focus on this like connection to others, right? So now fast forward several hundred years to where we write stories down, we put them in print, we make them into movies, right? We make them into shorts, we have them online, right? There is something about the human experience being shared that is super powerful. So when we look at a story, so if you have a student who's a white student and they're reading a story that is not how they personally racially identify, what they're really connecting with is the human experience. What they're connecting with is, wow, that's not an experience I have, but now I see it. Like I see it. I still might not ever really understand what it's like to live that, but now I at least maybe have a greater glimpse into what it is like for somebody else, right? The same goes for anybody that's not their lived experience. So whether it's a story that features a girl character who really gets denied access to things because of the fact that they're a girl, right? If it's a story about a student who has to immigrate here and has to learn new languages, right? And it's so overwhelming at first to try to learn a new language, navigate a space, figure out what to do at recess when you don't understand any part of this, right? So they start to know what it's like to live that experience and feel that way. And that's the power of this. right? Is building that, cultivating that empathy, right? And so I see it time and time again. Kids will pick up books all the time that sometimes they're mirrors, but sometimes, a lot of times, they're windows for them, right? And what's really funny is a kid, you'll pick a book, you're like, I know you're going to love this book. It's about a boy who plays basketball and he has to try really hard and he's just kind of on the edge of the team. And you kind of like see this in this student in the classroom, and they'll pick it up and they're like, wow, you know, Miss Anderson, this book was a window for me. I did not connect with this. I didn't know this. I don't know anything about this. And you're thinking to yourself, really? You live this experience every day. But what they're seeing in this is they're seeing something else about the character, right? They're seeing something else about the experience, and they're growing, right? So even if they don't, you know, personally identify, it's amazing how kids will see connections in a book, right? Even at the youngest age, they can see more than we ever imagine about the human experience.
Well, that was wonderful. Thank you for that. Thank you for that explanation. Any more questions?
I see one that says, for connecting with others, when do book clubs start being useful and how? Okay, so I have seen book clubs be successful in some of our youngest classrooms. So book clubs don't have to look the same. You know, as an adult, we think of a book club like a book club a month, like there's a deadline, you've read your book, you come and talk about the whole book, right? So in our classrooms, we would do it a little bit differently. So a student might be reading, like a group of students might be enjoying a text that's supported by an adult in the classroom, like the teacher's doing a read aloud with a group of students, they're connecting, and they do a lot of talking about the text and referring back because it will have pictures. So even if they can't read every word, they can say, this is the part of the story that I really connect with because, right? And they can be talking about it with their peers, right? So it might be a little bit more supported in our youngest grades. You easily see book clubs going on by second grade very, very independently. So the teacher might structure it that, like, after 2 chapters, you're going to get together and talk about the book. They might not wait till the whole book, right? But they talk about the book, right? And then they read the next part. Like, you see that start to happen very independently at second grade. But I have seen some very well-skilled teachers who are able to teach how to do book clubs, even when students are sort of what we call emerging readers.
Anybody else got anything more? Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, and of course, if anybody has more questions, you could always just send them to the foundation and we'll pass them on. I want to thank Amber again. Amber, you remind us all how extraordinary teachers are. And, you know, you're more than a teacher, you're a curriculum developer and all sorts of wonderful teacher leadership qualities. But we are reminded of how extraordinary it is to have people like you in our world, in the world of our children. And I want to thank all the attendees who were with us tonight. Thank you for taking your time to hear this wonderful explanation, to be enriched by listening to someone like Amber tell these stories. Also, I want to remind you, I want to remind you that this was recorded tonight, and so it will be available to be shared with folks that weren't able to join us just now. The Bellevue Schools Foundation will have its next Education Connections in February on the 9th, also at 5 o'clock. And that night, we're going to talk about some of the newest grants that are in a new category of granting called innovation and incubation grants. And they're very exciting. It's kind of a newish idea and some pretty cool things going on. So I encourage you to join us February 9th for that. Thank you again for everybody who was with us tonight, and we encourage you to learn everything you can about the foundation. I think you'd be pleased at what the foundation does for the district and for programs as extraordinary as the one like this that Amber brought to us. Thank you again, Amber.
Thank you very much for having me. I cannot thank Bellevue Schools Foundation enough, and which means I'm also thanking every one of the parents who are on this call, family community members that are on this call, and everybody out there in our broader community who's donated. The power is immense, and so thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you.